Howdy, everybody. We're Super Monkey Fighters. I am Loki, here with Papa Nugget and Monkey Feathers, back for another movie podcast. How you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Fantastic.
It's good to hear, considering the topics we're going to be diving into today. So this time we went apparently to the way back to a movie that came out in 2000 called Requiem for a Dream. If you haven't seen this or don't know anything about it, it is one of the darkest movies I've ever seen in my life. The blurb for it is: the drug-induced utopias of four Coney Island people are shattered when their addictions run deep, which is a very high-level synopsis of this. Directed by Darren Aronofsky, was written by Hubert Selby Jr., who also wrote the book it's based on. And Darren Aronofsky also helped out with the screenplay. It stars Ellen Burstyn as Sara Goldfarb, Jared Leto as Harry Goldfarb, Jennifer Connelly as Marion Silver, Marlon Wayans as Tyrone C. Love, Christopher McDonald, who you will know from Happy Gilmore fame, does play a very repetitious but important part in the film, and then a whole slew of other people. As you go through this movie, you will recognize quite a few faces throughout, especially if you are a fan of Breaking Bad or Candyman. So it's really not just the story of the four people. Like, those are the kind of the four central characters, but everything about this film is addiction and kind of that downward spiral and where that leaves people. Because even all of the side characters, you can see different levels and different styles of addictions and how it influences their lives and all that kind of stuff. But it does very much center around four characters, three of them just fairly traditional junkies, and then one of them, a little old lady who gets addicted to diet pills. So I think we're going to shake it up this time, and I'm going to go to Monkey Feathers first and have you jump into this one.
What I would say that I liked that this movie handled different addictions, because in the beginning, the mother is not addicted to diet pills, she's addicted to television. And in a way, she's addicted to food because she's eating food, she's eating sugar, she's eating all these things, and then it switches to diet pills.
Well, and it's in stark contrast to the TV program that she's addicted to. With that is all about being healthy, getting your life straight. It's the 30-day change your experience, and she's sitting there, eating chocolates while watching the thing. So
yeah,
she's mixing these two addictions. That her addiction is more positive affirmation in everything that she's doing, and so it's
Yeah, so I like.
She's a tough character for me. Fantastic, perfectly played, but it reminds me of people near and dear to me, and so it's a very painful one to watch.
Yeah, so I liked that it wasn't just someone is addicted to cocaine, or someone is addicted to weed, or someone's addicted to just pills in general. I liked that it did talk about other addictions, because especially nowadays, where you have the parents saying, my child's addicted to playing video games, my child's addicted to watching television, my child's addicted to social media. It starts to play in hand to other addictions that you see nowadays, where people are stuck to their phones, or they're stuck to the TV, or they're spending hours on end playing video games instead of going to school or something. So I liked that it did handle that, instead of just the normal run-of-the-mill addictions.
The way I've always described it is the movie doesn't really start in a happy place. It starts kind of low, and usually you'd see characters maybe either go through struggles and then come back and be better, or work to a better life. But I think it starts about here and ends somewhere down, 10 miles down. It's just a dive, like from the get-go. It's pretty much just a constant downhill dive into that. So
it's kind of hard to just say I like a film about addiction, because that's not a good thing to say. But I mean, overall, I did like the film, and I liked a lot. Granted, it's an early film, and it's a low budget film, and they didn't have a whole lot that they can do with the money that they had. So the fact that they were doing some things like, I guess, time lapses is how they describe it, or you gave crap for Friday the 13th and how they used handheld, where this one is a lot of handheld up in your face.
Yeah.
These people are running and it's very handheld. Yeah. It didn't feel out of place for me. I don't know why a lot of handheld shots don't, but it just didn't feel out of place. It felt like it belonged with how they were shooting the film.
It's one of those things used correctly. It can lend a lot to storytelling. This came out in a time frame when that was becoming more and more popular, and then started to be way overused. It was the point when I saw it. Law and Order started employing it, and theirs was more of a fake handheld. You take the tripod head and you make it really loose, and you just hold the tripod head and you just kind of wiggle it a little bit. Seeing that was really a point where I was like, all right, handheld is dead. I want everything to be on a dolly and a jib and have smooth, perfect camera movements from that point on. And that was, early 2000s-ish when that kind of took off. But the thing that I think stood out to me when it comes to the camera work is their use of a technique called Snorri Cam, where the camera is attached to the actor looking back at them. I think every character except Jared Leto's character, Jim, or Harry, has that in some scene or another as they descend into their own personal hells. It's one of those things where Marlon Wayans didn't expect Marlon Wayans to be a good actor based on his previous comedic roles. You expect him to be more of just the goofy comedian guy. But his scene with that, when he's getting promoted in the drug cartel and there's a hit and he runs away with blood on his face, like that was one of those uses where you're like, that's how that should be done. That camera style lends itself to the story because it puts you literally in the face of the actor while they're doing their performance. And Jennifer Connelly's later on as she's leaving the apartment after a dirty deed and then runs outside and throws up. Like it really lends itself to that. The montage that they do a lot of. They do a really good thing of anytime they're getting high, there's a quick succession of shots to really just showcase that. But throughout the film, it just gets quicker. The first times it's there, it's a full sequence of what's going on, and then like they're watching TV and they're getting they're thinking bad thoughts, and they visually represent that very well within each character. Either they're flashing back and having a memory, or they're imagining something else that's going on, and then you just see like the and it's like 3 beats, and then they're completely different. I did like how they did all of that.
Yeah, and to me that represents like as they go deeper into their addiction, that high gets it's harder and harder to get that high, right? So the first time it's like it takes some time, and then it's just now they're at a point that they're just addicted and they have to do it just to meet their addiction. It just becomes another thing they have to do, and the high isn't the reason to do it anymore. Yeah.
And it helps just kind of move things through quicker, so you're not seeing you get the sense of how often it happens in their lives without it taking 14 hours to get through it all. So it's just that quick little, here's the change, here's the visual and auditory cues that this is what's going on. And then especially with Ellen Burstyn's character, Sarah, she's taking pills, and so she is taking more and more pills as she goes. Like they establish that she needs to do that, but then as that goes, there's 3, there's 4, there's mixtures, there's those kinds of things. So I did really like the way that they did that, especially at the time. I think that a lot of those things were different from the norm of how films were being made.
I like that part of the story in the way that it is just, she's just some regular old lady that doesn't even realize what she's doing. She seems oblivious to it all, the fact that, or what she's taking, her addiction, but her eye is on that prize, right? So, and at some level, she's justifying it. Because she wants to reduce her weight to wear a dress and be on the show.
Yeah.
Right. So
to be on television.
So to reach that goal, she's able to ignore everything else with the goal to achieve that. And I think that rings true for probably a lot of people, whether they would want to admit it or not. So that part of the story I really enjoyed. and seeing that kind of transformation of her was an exciting ride.
Yeah.
The thing that I liked was the kind of the journey. Obviously, it's going to show a journey of people's addiction.
Yeah.
But what the movie really said to me, distilled down, is that like everyone has addictions, and it's about how we justify why we have them. And even though people will say like, oh, that person's addicted to that, or that person's addicted to that, but then like they don't even, they're completely oblivious to their own addictions. And I think to me, that's what what I got out of the movie, was that it's easy to always see everyone else's problems, but it's hard to see your own problems. And that's where Jim goes over and sees his mother, and he immediately notices like she's all strung out. And she's like, no, they're just diet pills. The doctor gave them to me, so they're fine.
Yeah. It's fine. Yeah.
And so that's the thing that I really liked about it. And then through that journey of how each of the characters not necessarily doing anything to change how their addiction is affecting them, and they just they do spiral kind of downwards, each of them. And that's what I liked the most.
Like I said earlier, that one's a tough one for me. She reminds me of my grandma and always has. When she's talking about being on television, like she doesn't have the same accent, but the same little performance that she does. I'm going to be on television.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something my grandma does. And there are things that she says that are things I've heard my grandma say, and just the attitude of that. It's very difficult for me to watch that character. I think it's amazing. I think that's the takeaway from any of the storylines in this. They're all very good. They're all acted very well. They're all amazing. But Ellen Burstyn in that role outshines all of them. It's tough for me to find things I don't like about this film overall, because even the things that bothered me this time, I think bothered me more because I knew they were coming. And I think it was a little bit too much montage. I think it's very repetitious in the soundtrack, but all by design, right? I mean, it's really what they're trying to get home, is just the way that these characters are stuck in their addictions. And so that constant repetition, it's kind of what I talked about, or what I wanted more out of with Passengers when we first talked about that, is I wanted to feel uncomfortable in the first 10 minutes of that movie, and then have that discomfort continue for another 10 minutes or so. You want to really feel what those characters are feeling, and I think Requiem does that very well. With the repetitions in the soundtrack, with the repetitions in the montages for the actual drug usage, and just hammering that home consistently over the course of an hour and a half, 2 hours. So I do really like that. I said I was very surprised with Marlon Wayans, because if you think of the character he plays in this, it's the same character he plays in every movie, mostly, just real. Like all of the other comedies, he's way over the top. He's a caricature of that. Scary Movie, which I believe came out the same year, the year before, right around that same time. I mean, he's that same character, but he's over the top. He's goofy. He's making faces. This one, he's a real person. He's believable in that role. And it just stands out very well. This was not necessarily the first time I'd seen Jared Leto, however you pronounce his name, in a film. It's the first time I realized I had seen him in a film. He's in Fight Club as the character Angel, who's the pretty boy, but I didn't realize he was just kind of a nothing character to me in that movie. It's another one of those, having seen everything else he's done since, he's very good in playing this role as what the role should be, not in boosting his ego as an actor. So it's interesting that they choose seasons as well to, abrupt segue. Starts in summer and everything's good for them. and then hits the fall where everything starts to get bad, and then the winter where it's the end of everything. There's no spring. And I've always thought of that more as being, well, you tell a film in 3 acts, you tell a play in more, or a book in more. But I think it's really more just there is no spring for these characters. I mean, that's, I think, the point. Like, there's never really been a spring. I mean, they always talk about how good it was, but there's really no evidence that it was any different than it's ever been. Even the opening scene, he's stealing his mom's TV to go and pawn it. But he's done that 100 times, to establish the characters. Like, this has been their lives. It has always been this. So there's never been a spring. There never will be a spring. And it's just a downward drop into hell. So
with this film, I didn't like the use of split screen, where you had 2 different things happening between characters split on the screen. I felt it very much out of place, and I felt it very awkward in a lot of scenes. Like with Jared Leto's character, or is it Harry?
It's or Harry. Jim. He's referred to as Jim by Marlon Wayans' character throughout the entire film. But his name's Harold. He's Harry, yeah.
Yeah, so the scene between Harry and Jennifer Connelly's character, I didn't like it because it was really awkward with, like, they would reach up and then it would kind of go into the other scene, but it just was very jarring for me. It's not something that I would have done, and in finishing out the rest of the movie, it started to feel to me like a test shot. Whereas, this might be interesting to do, so let's do it. Because they didn't continue it throughout the rest of the film. They did other shots and other sequences for shooting.
Quite a bit, yeah. The same ones over and over again. Quite a bit, yeah.
But with the split screen, it just felt like, you know what, we'll try this. We'll see if this works. And because of budget reasons, they didn't get rid of it because they couldn't reshoot the scene.
Well, and
that's what
early on in that scene, it does really feel like it was a wide shot that they cropped in on. But the last half of it, you can tell that it wasn't. It was 2 completely different scenes. There's a point when he reaches up and touches her face that it looks like that's what it is. But then she does the same, except there's no way her arm would have to be seen in the other frame. So, that was an interesting one. There is, and I got to look it up, The Rules of Attraction. That's the name of the movie. Came out a couple of years later. That has actually the best use of split screen I've ever seen. So it's split screen following 2 characters, and they come into screen and have a conversation while it's still split screen, and then they walk away separately. It's a really cool scene. You bring up split screen because they do use they do use that in this, and that's, I think, a really good use of it. I think people don't. It's jarring and it doesn't look right, and you lose the cinematic widescreen with most films.
Yeah. So, no, I didn't really like the use of the split screen. I felt that if they took it out and did a wide shot, or just a close-up shot of one character and then a close-up shot of another character, or however they decided to do it, I think if they took out the split screens, I would have liked it more.
As far as kind of the shots or the split screen, like, it didn't bother me. I would say, to me, there's a lot of kind of quick, jarring cuts in a number of different things throughout the movie. But to me, it almost seems intentional, trying to kind of show that, like, what goes through the brain of someone that's on drugs or strung out. I think that those kind of jarring cuts is a way of trying to show that, like, things have been missed, like that choppiness. And so to me, that's what it seems like it's trying to portray. And so it works for me, even though I think most movies, it probably would be very annoying. But it seemed to work for me.
One of the other things that I didn't like, but this is just like a small little minor detail, it was Harry's situation in the hospital where he has a really screwed up arm, and the doctor looks at it And instead of what would normally happen is a doctor would fix him and then he would go to jail, he went to jail with a messed up arm. And then they decided, oh, well, I guess this is a bad situation, so we should take you back to the hospital. And then they cut off his arm. That wouldn't happen in real life. They wouldn't just send him to jail with a screwed up arm. A doctor's going to fix him and then he's going to go to jail.
Yeah, the book doesn't say anything if it's just quickly glancing at it, whether it's based on true events or anything like that. But I think in the late 70s, early 80s, it probably was a little bit more common for a doctor to just, oh, you're a junkie, get out of here. Because he does grab the thing that's unrealistic for me is he grabs vials of something, which these days is not like that stuff's never left around. It's not just sitting out in the open. There's if you've ever been to your doctor, like they're scanning cards and signing in all that kind of stuff. But in the 70s and 80s, that wasn't a thing. That's so it's kind of mixing time periods with that a little bit. The thing that's unrealistic for me in that scene is that his friend sits in the waiting room and waits for him. Like he knows why you're there. You know what's going to happen. Like you drop him off and you leave and tell him where you're going to be in case he gets out.
Granted, it's probably a different time period and things were happening differently. I still believe that with the doctor code, you're not just going to send someone off to jail with an arm that's basically infected and they're going to die. You're bound to fix it up, give them some type of medication, or right then and there cut off the arm, and then you send them to jail. So I had issues with that, but it's a small little part of the film that it's just not something that I would just say like, oh yeah, change this. I mean,
it's certainly a standout moment. This is one of those that I think is a very as near to perfect as you can make a film. I think it's also a very important film. I think it's one I would highly recommend everyone see, especially teenagers. I think if people saw this film, I've always kind of jokingly said if people saw this film, there would be no drug addiction problem, which is a very simplistic view of it. But I do think that this showcases the very bad and negative of that very well. Well, I think nitpicky things. So here's the thing. There is one thing I would change. There are quite a few scenes that were shot on a soundstage that look like they were shot on a soundstage. Most notably the doctor scenes, like when Sarah's getting the pills for the first time. The doctor's got a glass door into the office, and you can very much see that it's just a blank set wall behind them. That's about the only thing I would change. Just that really has always taken me out of that. We're like, this is not a real place. And it's just, it felt more like it was like a con man movie. So I guess that would be the one thing I would change, that one shot.
So I don't know if I would necessarily change this, but I think it would be interesting if it would be incorporated. And it may not work, but if there was a way to, whether it be like through a new character or it could be in the same characters, but I almost wouldn't do that. But I think the story could be expanded to include other types of addictions. I'm worried that if that were in there, and when I say other types of addictions, I mean less serious, like not drug addictions, right? And what we kind of talked about, but how other addictions still control people's lives. And I think it feeds into the same story. But like I said, I don't know if that would destroy the story if that was added. But I would like to see the concept and to see how that could play out. That's just an idea. I don't know if it's a good idea.
Like I'm imagining like a caffeine addiction where somebody can't get their Starbucks and they've just got a headache for the rest of the day. But because there is a little bit of that within some of the secondary characters with specifically like sexual addiction. Mm-hmm. They do kind of just, it's there and that's it. And then this time watching through it, I kind of felt the same way with the infomercial was, oh, well, this is more of a, an addiction to fame mm-hmm. or to praise or that kind of thing. Because the way that is people are shouting the guy's name and chanting everything about him, and it's great. But watching it this time, he's not a character; he's a plot device. He's that whole thing is just a tool to move, not necessarily move the story, but it's not a character to drive and develop things. It is the drug rather than a person, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see, more of other addictions and how they work. Maybe less extreme ones.
And that's kind of what I'm saying. Those the way people act and attach themselves to things. It would be interesting to see that. And I mean, there is that part of it in there. It's just not as big a focus. It's not the focus of the film, which is why I'm worried that like you start having those competing things.
Yeah, the other ones are very much heavily overshadowed by the the drug addiction and that. So
I would change the split screens because to me it did take me out of the film. It just felt very jarring. It felt out of place. And as I mentioned earlier, it felt like it was not necessarily a planned shot, but a shot that was just, let's try this, see if it works. Okay, well, it may or may not have been what we wanted, but we don't have the money or the time to reshoot it. So we'll just put it in anyway. Or if it was shot as a wide shot, we're just going to cut it up and it's going to be now 2 close-up shots of these 2 characters. I wasn't a fan of it. And I think that if they changed it or got rid of it, I would have liked the film more than what it was, because it really did just take me out of the film when they used it, and especially because they didn't continue using it throughout the rest of the film, it just fell out of place.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know if that was a planned, like, storyboarded shot that they wanted to do, or if it was something they're sitting in the editing bay going, you know what, this doesn't quite work, let's try this, and they're like, oh, that's great. Just to know if it was a planned or more of an organic. It's interesting to see that we haven't had any major story changes or character changes. It's all been, this shot took me out, that shot took me out, or I'd like to see more of the story expanded into different things. So I think it's a sign of a very good movie. When this came out, people ask me all the time if they should see movies, and my advice was always, yeah, regardless. Like, my thought was, see the movie yourself, form your own opinion. And the more you do that with films, the more likely you'll identify whether or not you're going to like a film based off of the trailer or basic synopsis of it all. So, but this is one I definitely recommend. Like I said earlier, I think everybody should see it. I think it's a very important film, culturally and historically, as well as from if you want to study film and learn about it, I think this is one to see, as well as Darren Aronofsky, his other earlier films. This would be his second one. The first one would be Pi, which I could go on at length about as well, more for anecdotal stories of my life, but it's also a very good one. Very jarring as well. I think he does that very well with most of his films. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up on this one? Recommendations from everybody, I would assume.
Yeah, I would recommend it. The thing that, just one thing that I would say is it's nice to see a movie that doesn't follow the typical story arc, but works at the same time. And I think that's kind of what you've been more or less kind of talking about. So because of that in and of itself, I think it's definitely one to see.
Yeah, I mean, my thought has always been watch a movie at least once. And if you make it through it, then great. If not, then you know you're not going to like it and you stop at 20 minutes. So I think watch a movie at least once and you get an understanding that, yeah, I like this film. I'll continue watching it, or once was enough and that's it. Or you made it 20 minutes and you're done. Yeah. So.
Well, and I do want to point out within that same vein, because Nugget, you saying this just reminded me of it. It is listed as having an R rating, but if I remember right, it was actually released not rated because they didn't want to have that stigma of being an NC-17, which I don't know if they changed that later on, or if maybe it was a not rated version that was released at some point in time. But it is still highly recommended, but still caveat of it might be a film that really offends the senses for some people.
Yeah.
It is a very dark movie.
It's raw.
It is a very graphic. It's graphic, not necessarily in a violent sense, but it is it doesn't shy away from anything. So just be aware of that as you go forward with it. So with that, I think we'll wrap this one up. Thanks for listening to us ramble, and hope you guys like it. Let us know what films we should watch. Let us know your thoughts on Requiem for a Dream, and what you liked, what you didn't like, what you change, all of that fun stuff. And we'll catch you in the next one. So, adios.